All right, so today we're going to do a deep dive into the Juan Chavez case.
Okay.
Serial killer targeting gay men in LA back in the late 80s, early 90s.
Wow.
And we're working off of this Wikipedia article. Honestly, just like reading through it, it's already giving me chills.
Yeah, it's a case that really gets under your skin,
Yeah.
especially when you consider just like the social context of the time.
Yeah.
AIDS was this massive, terrifying unknown back then.
Mm-hmm.
And there was so much, fear and misunderstanding around it.
Oh, absolutely. And to think that Chavez was like out there preying on those fears.
Exactly.
But let's start at the beginning. Let's talk about Chavez's early life. The article says he was born in 1965 in Ciudad Juarez, Mexico, abandoned by his parents,
Wow.
raised by his grandmother, potentially abused by his grandmother.
Yeah.
I mean, talk about a rough start.
What's a tragic beginning? And it makes you wonder about the lasting impact of those early experiences. I mean,
Right.
there's a whole body of research on adverse childhood experiences.
Oh, right.
Or ACEs. And studies have shown a really strong correlation between things like abuse, neglect, and household dysfunction in childhood, and a higher risk of, going on to engage in criminal behavior later on.
Wow. I had no idea there was a connection that strong. So are we saying that basically Chavez's difficult childhood made him a killer?
I wouldn't go that far. I mean, correlation doesn't equal causation. Plenty of people go through really difficult childhoods and lead productive lives. But understanding those early experiences, I think it helps paint a more complete picture of the individual, and maybe what factors contributed to their choices.
Right. Okay. That makes sense. So after that, what happened? It says he ran away to the U.S. with his half-brother and ended up in California.
Yeah, he settled in California, working all kinds of low-skilled jobs. He actually even gets married, has a couple of kids.
Oh, wow.
But there's this pattern of petty crime arrests that just kind of follows him.
Okay.
It's almost like a build-up to something more sinister.
Okay, so this is where things start to take a turn. So his first known murder was in July 1986, a man named Alfred Roswell.
Oh.
And they met at a spot known for, well, the article uses the term street hustlers.
Right.
Was that just like a common thing back then?
Well, yeah, I mean, think about it. This was before the internet, before dating apps.
Yeah, right.
For gay men, especially at a time when just being openly gay it could be dangerous.
Yeah.
These were often the only places to connect, but they were also inherently risky.
Yeah.
Imagine a time with no widespread cell phones, no way to easily share your location or call for help.
Yeah.
Chavez was really exploiting that vulnerability.
Yeah.
Preying on men who were just looking for connection in a society that often, forced them into the shadows.
Oh, it's just heartbreaking and terrifying. So what happened to Roswell?
Well, Chavez went back to Roswell's apartment and strangled him, robbed him, took his stuff, even stole his car. And then he gave the car away to another felon that he knew.
Wait, he just gave it away. Wouldn't that be kind of a big red flag?
You would think so, right?
Yeah.
But that careless act, that's actually what would lead to his downfall later on.
Really?
Investigators, they found a fingerprint on that car window.
Oh, wow.
And years later, that print would come back to haunt him.
It's like a breadcrumb trail, even if he didn't mean it to be. So after Roswell, did the murders just continue?
They did. And they escalated in 1989. 4 more victims, all men.
Wow.
Ruben Panam's a fashion designer, Donald Kleeman, Michael Cates, and Leo Hildebrand. He was an elementary school teacher.
Oh, my God.
All found in their own homes, all strangled.
That pattern targeting men in their own homes just seems so personal, so invasive.
Right.
It makes you wonder, what was driving him?
Exactly. And that's what we need to unpack next.
Yeah.
Was it simply power and control, or was there something more at play, something darker? We'll dive into Chavez's possible motives and his psychology after a quick break. All right, so we're back, and I think it's time to kind of dig into the really chilling psychology behind Juan Chavez's crimes.
Yeah.
It's clear that he had this pattern of targeting gay men in their homes, and it raises some disturbing questions.
Yeah, I'm really struck by his method. Strangulation. It's so up close and personal,
Right.
almost intimate in this twisted way. I mean, does that tell us anything about his motives?
Yeah, it really suggests this need for power and control.
Yeah.
The serial killers, they often derive a sense of satisfaction from completely dominating their victims.
Right.
And strangulation allows for that. It's slow, it's deliberate,
Right.
puts the killer in absolute control.
Now, you mentioned earlier that the AIDS epidemic was unfolding at this time. Did that factor into his crimes at all?
I mean, we can't ignore that context. This was a time of just intense fear and prejudice against gay men. A lot of people wrongly believe that AIDS could be spread just through casual contact,
Right.
you know?
So Chavez's victims were already facing like societal stigma and fear, and he was exploiting that.
Exactly. He was tapping into this climate of fear, and his choice of victims really suggests that his crimes might have been fueled by homophobia.
Right.
In fact, later on, Chavez would actually claim that he was trying to clear California of gays to stop the spread of AIDS.
Hold on, he actually said that. That's horrifying. I mean, was he delusional, or was that just like a way to justify his actions?
It's tough to say for sure. It could have been a genuine belief, however misguided,
Right.
or it could have been a way to rationalize his crimes, to make himself feel like he was doing something, righteous.
Wow.
But regardless of his true intentions, it really highlights how prejudice and misinformation can have these just devastating consequences.
It's a chilling reminder of how hate can just like twist someone's perception of reality.
Yeah.
So with this horrifying pattern emerging, how did investigators finally catch up to Chavez?
It's kind of a twist, actually. He was arrested in 1992,
Okay.
but not for murder. It was for kidnapping and robbery. Totally unrelated to the killings.
So it was just pure chance that they got him.
Not entirely. Remember that fingerprint on Alfred Roswell's car?
Right.
Well, investigators were starting to connect the dots between these unsolved murders. Noticing the similarities in the victims and the method.
Yeah.
They tracked down the inmate who'd received Roswell's car, and that fingerprint led them straight to Chavez.
Wow. What are the odds? So it wasn't some sudden breakthrough. It was more of a slow, methodical process of putting the pieces together.
Exactly. And it's a testament to those investigators, their persistence.
Mm-hmm.
They brought Chavez in for questioning, and eventually he confessed to Roswell's murder and 4 others from 1989.
I'm guessing with the confession and that fingerprint, it was like an open and shut case, right?
Well, they also had another piece of evidence. Chavez was caught on camera looting one of the victims' ATM cards.
Oh, wow.
It's almost like he wanted to get caught, or at least he wasn't being very careful.
Almost like his arrogance caught up with him.
Yeah.
So what was the outcome of the trial?
On June 21st, 1999, Juan Chavez was sentenced to 5 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. It seemed like justice had been served, but the story, it takes another dark turn. Just a few months later, on September 9th, Chavez committed suicide in prison by hanging himself.
Oh, wow. I did not see that coming. So in the end, he escaped facing the full consequences of his actions.
In a way, yeah. But there's one more twist to this story. Remember that final victim, Lynn Penn, back in 1990?
Yeah.
A cigarette butt with DNA evidence was found at the scene.
Right.
But the technology to analyze it just wasn't available back then.
Right. You mentioned that DNA analysis was in its early stages in the 90s. So what happened with that evidence?
Well, in 2012, years after Chavez's death, that DNA evidence was finally tested. And guess what? It linked directly back to him.
So even in death, he was still leaving a trail of victims behind him.
It's unsettling to think that he may have had even more victims that we don't know about.
Yeah, it's a sobering thought for sure. But it also brings up a really interesting ethical question. What's the point of pursuing a case when the perpetrator is already dead? Is it about justice or something else?
Yeah, I mean, is it about like closure for the families, knowing for sure that the person responsible for their loved one's death has been identified? Or does it even go beyond that?
It's really complicated. There's no easy answers. I mean, some argue that resources should be focused on preventing future crimes, and supporting victims who are still alive.
Right.
Others say that solving these cold cases, even when the perpetrator is deceased, is crucial for acknowledging, the full scope of their actions and providing a sense of resolution for the families.
Yeah, I can definitely see both sides. On the one hand, you've got the practical considerations, limited resources.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, you have the emotional and ethical implications of just leaving these crimes unsolved. Exactly. And technology is constantly evolving, right?
Yeah.
Making it even easier to solve these cold cases. So we're going to be grappling with these ethical questions more and more, I think.
So going back to Chavez and putting aside this whole debate about posthumous investigation for a minute, the article mentions how his case really shines a light on the societal prejudices of the time. Like, we can't just view his crimes in isolation, right?
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
I mean, the AIDS epidemic created this whole atmosphere of fear and misinformation.
Yeah.
And tragically, some individuals like Chavez actually use that fear to justify their hatred and violence.
Right.
It's just a terrifying example of how ignorance and prejudice can have just these real-world devastating consequences.
It makes you wonder how many other crimes against gay men went unreported or uninvestigated back then, just out of fear of judgment or distrust in law enforcement. It's a really dark period to reflect on.
It is. And while we've made Huge strides in terms of, LGBTQ rights and acceptance since then.
Right.
We can't get complacent. Prejudice and discrimination, they still exist, and it's crucial that we stay vigilant and keep fighting for equality for all.
I think that's such a powerful message to take away from this. We have this responsibility to learn from the past and work towards a future where these kinds of tragedies just don't happen again. We can't just, hope for change. We need to be active in creating a more just and equitable society.
I couldn't agree more. It starts with challenging our own biases,
Absolutely.
speaking out against injustice and advocating for those who are marginalized. Even small actions can make a difference.
Right.
Education, empathy, and open dialogue. Those are the tools we need to dismantle prejudice and foster a more inclusive world.
Well said. And before we go, I want to take a moment to remember the victims in this case. Alfred Roswell, Reuben Panis, Donald Kleeman, Michael Cates, Leo Hildebrand, and Lynn Penn. Their lives were cut way too short, and their stories need to be remembered. It's easy to get caught up in the details, of the investigation and the psychology of the killer, but we can't forget the human cost of these crimes.
Absolutely. Behind the headlines and the court documents are real people with families and loved ones who've been forever changed by these tragedies.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the life and crimes of Juan Chavez, I'm left with a lot to think about.
Yeah.
His story is just a chilling reminder of the dark side of human nature, the horrible impact of prejudice, and, the importance of fighting for justice and equality.
It's a heavy topic for sure.
Yeah.
But it's a conversation we need to have.
Yeah.
And hopefully by understanding the past, we can prevent similar tragedies from happening in the future.
And on that note, I want to leave our listeners with a final question to ponder. How do societal prejudices and misconceptions contribute to violence against marginalized communities? And what can we do as individuals to foster greater understanding, acceptance, and ultimately create a safer world for everyone?
That's something we all need to think about, both individually and collectively.
Yeah.
Because silence in the face of injustice is complicity. We all need to be active in creating a more just and equitable world.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep striving to make the world a better place.